Hi, hello everybody. My name is TJ
Hey.
Hammond. Hey. Thank y'all for joining us for our sixth summer virtual hangout. Tonight we have two amazing alums, Malanna Wheat and Averie Bishop. They will be discussing their work related to the criminal justice system and talking on points regarding Black Lives Matter. So that's all I have for our introduction. Malanna, if you can go first, and then Averie, can you please introduce yourselves to the audience, the virtual audience, and then we can get started with some questions. Also, before they start, if there are any questions that you as audience members have for me to ask them once we're done with the moderator questions, please send them privately to Lamisa. And if you're unable to do it privately, just do it in the group, in the chat, and we'll get those answered for you if we have time, if time permits. So, Malanna.
Hi, everyone. I'm Malanna Wheat. I am a Black woman. I am a poet. I'm a writer, a researcher, a green tea connoisseur. I love a nice burgundy lip and a nice gold hoop. But more importantly, I am dedicated to liberation through my love for words. I think that stories are the vessel of connection, and I think that words are alive. They stream from our mouths, they dance in routine in our minds, and they silhouette pages. Stories, I mean, as a storyteller, which is one of my favorite mediums, and specifically oral history, I think storytelling honors a very radical form of decolonization from the standpoint of thinking about the stories that we tell ourselves and the stories that the world tells us. And those become enmeshed in who we are, in the multidimensionalities of our identity. And so when we speak them out loud, when we write them down, when we type them out, we start that process of unlearning. It's toilsome, it's constant, but it's very transcendent. And so I'm very happy to be here with you guys and share a little bit about my research as we get into these questions. But thanks for being here.
Hey guys, my name is Averie. I'm a second-year law student right here at Southern Methodist University, Dedman School of Law. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And first and foremost, I am an advocate and an ally, specifically in the legal realm and legal industry. I recently received my student bar card, which means I will be working under the supervision of an attorney in our legal clinic starting actually next Monday. I will be working with the domestic abuse, the women's domestic abuse clinic, where I will be representing clients, females who have been abused by their partners. And aside from that, I am a bargain shopper. I like shopping at thrift stores. I like a good deal. And what else? I like to, if you guys haven't meandered down Katy Trail yet during the coronavirus, I highly recommend. It's a great place to get some breath of fresh air. So yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for having me here today. And I'm excited to answer all of your questions.
Those were some awesome introductions. Thanks, guys. Okay, we're going to dive right in. So this question's for both of you. Malanna, if you will answer first. The question is, what inspired you to get involved with criminal justice efforts in the first place?
I love this question because it's connected to the SMU Embry Human Rights Program. So in December of 2017, I was fortunate enough, I met Averie, and I'd known Lamisa, but we went on a trip. Actually, we might have met during that trip, honestly, or somewhere during that semester when I had returned to SMU. And we went to Poland on the human rights education trip, kind of like I'm sure you guys are all familiar with it, but an independent study throughout Poland for 3 weeks. And I love this experience because it's something that is foundational to where I've gotten today. And I write about it. I wrote about it in my grad school application and my Fulbright application. I speak about it very frequently because it was the initiation to where I am today. So first, when I arrived, I came in from Barcelona because I had been studying abroad. So there was one day where I was on my own and then I met the group the following day. So my first interaction being in Poland, which I think it's a little bit different now because they're having some flood of immigration, but it was in 2017, one of the most homogenous countries in the European Union. And I had booked a room at the Hilton that my mom had bought for me, and when I arrived, they denied my reservation. I then bought another on my phone, I bought another night and showed them a new order confirmation for the reservation, and they still denied me. So during that time, I basically had to find another place to go. And that was kind of like my first introduction to like, okay, welcome to Poland, welcome to this trip. And it was really, it jump-started the entire trip. Throughout the trip, the 3 weeks, I'll say that when we went to, I believe it was Majdanek, which was one of the concentration camps, it was the first time that I had had a visceral reaction to space. And I'll talk about it later, but there is a difference between space and place. And place meaning that it's space with meaning, right? Human experiences give this space meaning. Space is just abstract, right? So in this particular place, right, which was a grave site of violence towards human experiences, I had a very raw reaction. And I have asthma. I mean, I felt very overcome with emotion being in a space, sorry, I want to correct that, in a place where people had quite literally perished. I mean, you're seeing nail etchings in the wall. You have shower heads above you. You know, there's a deep Prussian blue that's stained where carbon monoxide, when it's trapped, it stains the walls this very deep color. And that was my first indication that like human experience, place is very, very important. And I think we live in a American culture that emphasizes time, and we don't really talk about place a lot. We're always talking about how we don't have enough time, where we're trying to go next, et cetera, but we don't really like sit and meditate on the places that we operate, or the places that other people have quite literally operated or are struggling to operate. And so that was my first connection in terms of a place that had given me a visceral reaction. And so when I left that place, I thought, okay, what happens to people that look like me on a mass scale like this in a particular place? And it led me, obviously, evidently, to the prison. And then as I started to kind of, you know, from a geographical standpoint, look into the prison, you know, a lot of people who do this work are very familiar with the Panopticon, are very familiar with Jeremy Bentham, and this idea that panoptes, the Greek word, means all-seeing. So this blueprint that, which we see in the concentration camp, we see in the prison, we see in TSA, we see in places of surveillance where one particular person is able to surveil a group of people. And so therefore they do what they should, in quotes, because they're being watched. And so it was very interesting to see like the hurting of people in a place, which they're very, very similar. They're very similar spaces. And I think people that are being upfront and are being raw and truthful about the connections between Nazi Germany and this country, they'll be able to, I mean, quite literally, even from lethal injection, right? We can derive very close derivatives from prison to the Holocaust. And so that was really like how I began doing this work. And it started in Poland, like in Poland, when I started to think through just the surveillance of people, the surveillance of my people, and what that means for the ramifications of me living in this country.
I also had a similar cathartic experience in Poland when I went in, I think it was 2017 when I went on the same trip as well. But for me, when I went on the civil rights pilgrimage, I think that's really when I came to the conclusion that criminal justice reform was what I wanted to do, where I wanted to be when I went to law school. When I went on the civil rights pilgrimage, you meander through the Equal Justice Initiative Museum, which was created by Bryan Stevenson. And Bryan Stevenson was a Black attorney who represented individuals on death row. He has an incredible book out called Just Mercy. And in that museum, there are letters framed on the wall from individuals who've been incarcerated and are waiting on death row or have a life penalty, and are writing to anyone who are willing to listen, to anybody who's willing to give them representation for free, just wanting someone to listen to their story and hear how they got to where they are now. And there was this one particular letter that I read that was framed on the wall in EJI, and I was standing amongst hundreds of other people because the day we went, there were so many people in attendance at that museum. One letter was from a Black 13-year-old boy who was incarcerated as an adult for marijuana possession even though his father was the one who possessed the marijuana in the vehicle. And the 13-year-old young boy in his letter was writing in his story of how he desperately wanted to go back to school, how he wanted to see his mom again, how he felt that the world had cheated him out of opportunities and the potential of being the person he was meant to be. And the legal justice system essentially failed him. And when I was standing in EJI in front of that wall amongst hundreds of people, I had an extreme, not exactly a panic attack, but a moment of understanding and acknowledging, you know, these experiences, these people, these stories and individuals who are pushed into these systems without any choice, without knowing their rights, not understanding how the system has already been set up to persecute them and objectify them and exploit them for how they look, who they hang out with, where they live, their economic class. And in that moment, when I couldn't breathe, I started sobbing. And fortunately enough, EJI and Brian Stevenson knew that when you walk through that museum, you were going to need a space to breathe and to reflect. And so beside that wall where those letters are posted, there is a breathing room. There's space, like Malanna had mentioned before, there's space to go in. And there are portraits of Black individuals there who were enslaved or incarcerated for you know, minute things. And you can sit in that breathing room and cry. You can find a position in the room where you're by yourself so that you can reflect on the letters that you read. And that was the moment where I committed to criminal justice reform in my life. I knew that it was a part of who I was in my story when I was a freshman in college. And, you know, during the 2016 presidential election, it was definitely something that I was interested in. But it wasn't until after the Poland trip, like Malanna had mentioned before, and then more importantly, the Civil Rights Pilgrimage and the EJI Museum, when I truly knew that that's where I belonged and that's what I would fight for the rest of my life.
Wow, those are awesome answers. I think it's great that the Human Rights Program, you know, inspired you guys to pursue your postgrad endeavors, and hearing your stories actually made me a little bit emotional, so thank you for that. This question is for Malanna. Can you talk to us about your master's thesis and your experience studying abroad in South Africa?
I can, yeah. So my master's thesis was titled Black Vulvas in the Hour of Chaos, the Inquiries on Incarcerated Blackness, the Female Body Politic and Spatialized Order in Cape Town, South Africa. And I wanted to read my introduction. I timed it, it's 3 minutes, so that you guys can just get a little bit of a taste. But it gives you a really good visual and puts you right in the space. So, and also the names have been changed, by the way. So I remember waking up late on a temperate winter day, mid-July 2019, scrambling to gather my towel and toiletries. Lionel would be arriving in the next 3 minutes, but that was fine because I had already become accustomed to the daily 2-minute shower limit, an initiative set by the South African government to manage the country's water crisis. The interview was set for 3 p.m., but he picked me up at 11 a.m. He drove me through every township in Cape Town, unveiling the woes of those that looked like him and I. I saw Black and colored kids that appeared to have mastered a joy so pure it transcended their environment. We chatted about poverty, thought, association, and choice, introspectively but delicately, over samosas and rooibos tea with sugar and milk. He said to me, "Scripture says we as humans were created to dominate over the things of, from, and on the earth, but a human being is not a thing, and while our bodies might be earthly, our souls are divine." He was preparing to re-enter and step foot on the grounds of Pollsmoor Prison, a space he hadn't been into in over 15 years. He was a corrections officer from 1993 to 2002 and had secured an interview for me, unauthorized, by the South African Department of Corrections, with a corrections couple that lived on site. As corruption would have it, we drove straight through the prison gates with no search and no record of our identification or entry after Lionel dapped up the security guards, 2 men of which he had previously worked with, overcome with giddiness by his presence. The ideas that transpired in that 2-hour-long interview are so wholehearted. In hindsight, I probably should have acquiesced when the couple offered me a gin neat upon arrival. If you never listened to the words of our conversation and only observed our body language, you'd most likely gather memoirs of fear, invisibility, supremacy, exhaustion, and unpredictability. From laughs to tears, from blank stares to lumps in throats, from stuttering and shuddering to crippling silence, the weight of the emotion in this moment revolutionized my notions of power dynamics. For the first time in my prison research experience, I listened and I held space for the acknowledgement of a paralleled experience, one that doesn't hierarchize harm. Too frequently, carceral examinations from academic research to dramatized documentaries put prisoners center stage. Despite the fact that this thesis does in fact do that, if you take nothing from this analysis, please understand that there are no exemptions. Hostile infrastructure does not discriminate, it sees no difference. The only thing that separates a prisoner from a guard is a title. The carceral state in its totality, from policing to the criminal justice system, provides the bodies and minds that hostile infrastructure, like the prison, feasts on. Of course, the hierarchy of power gives greater leverage to the guard or to the warden or to the chaplain, but the infrastructure itself has the ultimate power. And so when I talk about the absence of freedom, I'm really in conversation about what it means to navigate a body and mind that feels foreign, a home that's been taken from you. I'm concerned with bodies and minds that know obedience before agency, and really bodies and minds that are no longer ours, but have been left lifeless on gurneys, left hanging, rotting, bleeding out as property first and carcasses last. The carceral state does a good job at convincing people that, as Dr. Melissa Sell states, their bodies and their minds are incapable, weak, broken, faulty, stupid, and susceptible. It teaches us that we are the sum of our decisions and not the sum of the parts that they built for us to make those decisions. It teaches us to live in trepid terror and to hate our Blackness. And when you make someone fear their own body or fear their own mind, it is absolutely the most insidious form of terrorism. In the analysis to follow, I will show how the South African carceral state uses race, space in order to dismember and hierarchize identities of Blackness. I will detail the effects of moral surveillance through religion and bodily surveillance through the female body as physical and mental, spiritual tactics to continuously destroy Black roots across time and space. Sorry, that emotional. But I just wanted to share that with you guys because I feel like it gives you a very raw version of the research that I did. And for me, I'm so grateful to University of San Francisco's program because you're allowed to do either a capstone, like a very classic thesis, which I did, or you can do an applied project. So you could do a documentary or a podcast, which some of my fellow members in my cohort did. But they allowed me to intertwine my positionality as reflective ethnography in my research, which I think is really important. I'm going to be frequently talking about decolonization, but like, I think it's time for us to decolonize a very specific academic form, for example, the dissertation, or things that need to be these very like, you know, structured forms of academia. And we know, and we all know, and we can all be very open that academia is very elitist in its own right. So I used a lot of I incorporated some of my own poetry into this thesis. And so I really put like everything into it, and it is my baby and I love it. But basically I'll say that what I learned is that freedom and order can coexist. And on the pathway to that, you have to meet people where they're at. And so for me, it was really, I was unlearning as I was writing, because when you're the Westerner, you know, or the American, and you fly in and you're extracting information from people, my advisor was always making sure that the questions that I'm asking and the way that I'm analyzing, are you making these people objects, right? And that is not the purpose of research. Subjects, as Michel Foucault would say, subjects are people are things that have consciousness, and objects don't. Their objects are being observed by people that have consciousness. And so even when we're working with vulnerable populations, we have to be very careful in you know, the ways in which we speak and the questions that we ask, that we're giving them that autonomy, that, or not giving them, sorry, let me retract that they are allowed to possess the autonomy in their birthright, and that it is simply that you're dealing with another human being, right? It's not like, even some of the questions that I would ask when I was writing the part about moral surveillance and how religion is used and mobilized in the prison from a very colonialistic Christian way, I had to kind of retract because I was so quick to be very, what's the word I want to use? I was very quick to jump to conclusions about Christianity and the way it was being used. And it's like the fact that if it's Christianity, if it's Barney, if it's whatever, the fact that whatever this is has carried this person quite literally to the point where they can sit in front of me and just talk to me, that's enough. It doesn't need to be, you know, how dare you, you know, think that Christianity is being used in a good way. They like, you're talking to a socially controlled person, right? So it's like, you can't be like, do you know that you're being socially controlled? It's not that type of research. So there's so much unlearning and decolonization just in me, right? Even as a Black woman, that I had to learn as I was dealing with other people, that was very painful. It's really a painful experience as a researcher when you're like, I didn't like that you did that to yourself. You take a step outside of yourself and you're like, I didn't like that you asked that question. I didn't like that you got frustrated. I didn't like that all of these things. I was dealing with the language barrier. I was dealing with a lot of things, but I was also frustrated because South Africa is a very interesting case study. I had to defend my Blackness in that space because everyone wanted to label me as colored or Indian or these other things. So it's like, I'm here, I'm on the continent for the first time, and I have this perception of the African woman that is just so amazing. And then I have one sitting in front of me telling me that she wants to be a white man in America, and if Black, then rich, right? So then Blackness becomes conditional, right? Or at least we go to shit with white toilet paper. It's like everything is juxtaposed against a white background, quite literally. So white gives Blackness definition, and that's really painful when you're sitting in front of someone that you have a deep reverence for, that you feel connected to, and you feel really broken, and you feel really traumatized by that. So I think it was a lot, but I wouldn't trade it for the world. And like I would encourage everyone to just like boots on the ground and throw yourself in it. Sorry, that was really long-winded, but I just wanted to read the intro.
Yes, that was amazing. Wow, that's so awesome. Good to hear about your experience. Okay, Averie, this question is for you.
Hi.
2 questions.
Sure. Okay.
This one. First question is, what are your thoughts on, what are your thoughts on the involvement in what are your thoughts on the Black Lives Matter movement in Dallas? And the second question is, it is very common for those in the legal profession, such as prosecutors and attorney generals, to not be viewed as allies to the Black Lives Matter movement. What is your take on that, and how do you navigate your role in the legal system? Which I cannot wait to hear your answer.
So for your first question, oh, excuse me, I'm getting text messages. So for that first question about what are my thoughts and how did I get involved with the BLM movement, as an Asian American woman, during the peak of the Black Lives Movement in probably April, I really had to sit down and determine what kind of role I needed to play in this movement to support my friends and, you know, my classmates and people that I've known all of my life. And thankfully, you know, through all of the education and the readings that we had throughout the human rights program as an undergrad, I understood that my position in this movement is not to be at the forefront, to not be a speaker, to not be a leader, and instead to be someone on the sidelines to help, you know, amplify the voices of the Black community and provide them with resources that they need so that they can be heard instead of me and my community, because it was them in the forefront. And so for me, I wanted to do something that aligned with this notion of, as an Asian American woman, yes, I wanted to help the Black community. So how could I, in my most efficient means, provide what I wanted to provide the community with in Dallas? Luckily, at the end of the last semester of my first year of law school, an opportunity fell into my lap with the Dallas Police Oversight Committee. And it was a new committee that was created to ensure that protesters who were being arrested in the Black Lives Matter protests were provided opportunity to have their testimony heard, matched with a pro bono attorney, and then be represented in the court of law for any sort of charges that they received protesting. And I knew in that moment that this was the way that I could help be on the ground and support the community during the Black Lives Matter movement. And that started in late April. It was a committee of churches, nonprofits, pro bono attorneys, law students, law schools, who worked together to take down testimony and the stories of these protesters who participated in the BLM movement protests here in Dallas. And I personally wrote down 376 stories of protesters who were charged for protesting here in Dallas. And because of that work that I did, they then transferred me to Los Angeles, California, where I continued to do this work with the Los Angeles Police Oversight Committee in LA. There we conducted 1,600 testimony and depositions for these individuals who were arrested. And we were able to match them with pro bono attorneys who will then hopefully soon in the near future represent them in the court of law. And that's how I got involved. I think your second question was about the legal profession and sort of the bad reputation that they may have in the BLM movement, and how do I personally navigate the system with that sort of bad reputation lingering. Right now, there's this phenomenon called progressive prosecutors. And if you don't know what that may mean, there is a movement for prosecutors who do have a lot of control in deciding and determining, the charges and the length of the time that they would spend in jail. Because of how much control these prosecutors may have, there's a push for individuals who are human rights oriented, civil rights oriented, to become progressive prosecutors. The unfortunate reality, though, is that despite this movement wanting to do so much good to address mass incarceration in the United States, it has failed to do so. And while it is nice, while it looks good on paper, what they want to achieve, it is not it's so difficult, especially when the system has already been created to work against Black and brown bodies. So at this point, where I stand personally, I would love to see the entire prison system abolished. How are we going to do that? That is the next step. Those are the questions that we need to answer. And I think that's it. That's it for your questions. Sorry, that was really fast.
No, thank you. Thank you. That was awesome. Okay, my next question is for the both of you. It's undeniable that this work demands a lot from us, personally and professionally. What do you do for self-care, and how do you celebrate your victories while knowing that, as Angela Davis says, freedom is a constant struggle? Malanna, can you go first?
Yeah, I can. So I do want to make one comment about self-care, that we need to be mindful of the ways in which individualism gets pushed as an agenda when we are in constant conversation, and the links to capitalism, right? The links to buy this and you'll be different from the rest of everyone else. So I just want to point that out, because I think that even there's a politics to naming, right? Self this, self that, self-preservation, self-care, X, Y, Z. But I think for me, I just relish in the fact that, first of all, that I have the mind that I have. Like, I really I'm very goofy, so I get really amped and hyped that I can just string together these thoughts, or that I could be on this call that I was at. Things like that are what keep me going, because, obviously everyone, I think, needs validation, right? It's oh, you're doing good. And even if it's these little things, whether you believe in, science from the universe, or you believe in a God, or whatever that looks like just these little pushes, but I don't know how to describe it, but it feels like everything is happening right on time. And I had touched on it before everyone got on the call, but just, I don't know, I feel like we've all, obviously we have all had some human rights training, whether it was SMU or not, or we're very familiar with things that are important to us. And it's it feels very rewarding to be here now, because we were on the forefront of this. When everyone was saying, how are you going to make money, and why is that relevant? And human rights shouldn't even have to be taught, first and foremost, but here we are. So it's I think I really relish in the fact that I am who I am, and I've received the opportunities that I have. And yeah, I think self-care for me is just is gratitude. I know that sounds really maybe that's not a good answer, but just feeling really grateful, and knowing that thank you is really a 2-word prayer for me.
I definitely agree with what Malanna said about being grateful. I think that's a great way to practice self-care. And Malanna, she also mentioned this notion in America of wanting this expectation of being independent and being forced to be independent in a society that rewards people who are extremely successful, work themselves ragged, working 50 hours a week for this journey, or this desire to receive material things, right? And for me, growing up in an Asian American household, daughter of an immigrant, I always desperately wanted to please people. I always wanted to satisfy their expectations. There was this deep unending desire in me to make sure people thought of me well, that I always said yes when people asked me for favors. And it wasn't until college, it wasn't until I met incredible individuals like Lamisa and Hope and Malanna and TJ, where, they told me, Averie, you really need to prioritize yourself, prioritize your mental and emotional stability. And I do that. I practice self-care by saying no more often. There's so much power in saying no. And when I finally got to the point in my life where I stopped saying yes all the damn time, you know, to everyone. My Google Calendar was out the roof. Like, there were things that I could not go to. I had signed up for like 3 events at the same time and I wasn't thinking. But anyways, now for self-care, girl, I hit them with a no, with a little star emoji. I'm like, sorry, today I am prioritizing me, and I'm choosing now to prioritize the events that I attend, prioritize the people that I speak with, like all of you guys tonight. And I say no to things that I know I can't complete in a timely manner. And it's helped me, you know, address this this desire to be liked by everyone and to be perceived as perfect. People just need to get over themselves and understand that it's okay to say no. And I highly recommend practicing that in your day-to-day lives. Just say no.
Yeah, like text them no with like a little heart emoji next to it. I love that. That's my favorite. Okay. Another question for the both of you. Malanna, if you will answer first. What are some inspiring initiatives you've witnessed, and how can we get involved as students here at SMU, locally, internationally?
Yeah, this one I have kind of an abstract answer, and then I have a literal answer. I think the literal answer Averie and I both touched on, but I think there is something so raw about putting yourself physically into places that do bring up a very visceral reaction, a human experience. When you need to put yourself in places where you feel more human, so that you can connect to not only other people, but to that place. Like, things have happened there, things have happened everywhere, but we don't think about them. Like, my last project for SMU, for digital journalism, I did pretty much like a multimedia kind of case study on all of the lynchings that happened in Dallas County. And my boyfriend lived in a building on Akron in Maine where someone was lynched, and SMU has a postcard in their archives of it. So it's like little things like that, and there's no acknowledgement, there's no, you know, cross in the ground or anything, but it's like everything that we navigate, every place that we navigate, there is some type of human experience that has occurred, whether it's traumatic or whether it's joyous, you know? And so I think we need to keep putting ourselves into those places. I know obviously with COVID, it's very difficult right now, but whenever we can, I think, like, I also went on the civil rights pilgrimage and went to the lynching memorial, which was another visceral reaction of like standing on a physical wooden board and having a museum curator and guide explain to you, you know, you're elevated and they're like, there's a sea of people, they're laughing at you, they're pointing at you, your family's right there, you're about to be set on fire. And it's like, you feel like you're about to drop to your knees, and you can tap back into like just that loneliness and that fear and that anxiety. And like, it gives you a sense of perspective. It gives you a sense of scale. Like, so I think that's what I would say quite literally is like, we all need to be in those places, and we need to push ourselves emotionally and viscerally so that we can really connect. I think obviously, like I said, with COVID and stuff, it's like the PowerPoint slides are not enough, right? Like, it's so easy, and I have my own critique on social media, but it can be a false sense of mobilization where we think that we're getting a lot further than we actually are. But when we look at, you know, case studies like the civil rights movement, it's like when people are on the ground, right? And the National Guard, despite I'm very anti, you know, carceral state, which I'll explain. When they're on the ground, then the laws have to change, right? Things get physically pushed forward. When you remove capital from from maybe the boycott of the Montgomery bus, like, you have to quite literally do things and take up space so that they see you and you're not going anywhere. You know, so I think that that's what I would say literally. I think figuratively, I think that we need to get a little bit more raw and a little bit more vulgar in the words that we choose. I think it's not enough, and I'll touch on it. And I'm really glad that Averie is, you know, on my side in terms of prison abolition. Like the word reform for me, it's not doing anything. It's not shaking any tables. It's not ringing any bells. It's really unfamiliar. And I want to call things what they are, right? I want to call, for example, I want to use the word for Black women, specifically in the healthcare industry and Black maternal mortality. I want to call it genocide, right? That, like, we need to start calling things what they are, and really returning, I think, for a lot of my Black ancestors, the work of Langston Hughes, the work of Toni Morrison, the work of people that were that were really, really raw with their language. And we already have those blueprints. So it's not like we need to, it's not utopian at all. It's just radical and it's revolutionary. So that's where I'm at. And my agenda is to speak with intention and to call things what they are. And to not sugarcoat anything, because we don't have time. It's really a matter of life or death, really.
Absolutely agree with what Malanna said about language. Language was actually going to be, my general answer to your question. And in addition to wanting to use words that call things what they are, I think it's also important that when we talk about, for example, like the carceral continuum, the carceral estate, these larger terms, academic terms that were coined by university professors and researchers, it's important that we ensure that the language, is changed so that people can fully understand what we're talking about. When I went to law school, when we were doing orientation for 2 weeks before we started the semester, they hounded us to write so that 6th graders can understand what we're writing about in our papers, because it's so important that information and access to knowledge is also not there aren't any gatekeeping mechanisms from people from understanding information that they need to fully understand their circumstances, the repercussions of their actions, individuals that may be impacted by, the criminal justice system and how to navigate the legal system. So it's important that the language that we use state exactly what it is. For example, abolish rather than reform, but also that we write and speak as if anyone, with a 6th grade level education can understand what we're talking about. Because when you have a bachelor's degree, when I go to law school, I am privileged with that diploma. When I graduate with that degree, I have so much privilege in the information and the education and the knowledge that I learned through those three years. And I may not know it, but subconsciously the way that I speak and the way that I write has changed as well to keep up with the diploma that I received. And oftentimes people can't understand what we're talking about. And luckily, like Malanna said, there are downsides with social media. One thing that I do like about social media is that they are able to write out the information well enough so that people from middle school, high school, freshmen of college can understand the mission and the steps and goals of certain movements. So language is definitely very important.
Very nice, very nice. All right, so that was my last moderator question. I can ask some more, but if we would like to, if the audience would like to send some questions into the chat or potentially unmute their mics and ask, feel free. Now's the time to do that. I know we have one question in the chat that I saw earlier. So I guess I'll go ahead and ask, unless Jan, if you're in here and you wanna ask yourself, you're more than welcome to. Okay, I will. What do y'all think of the university's appointment of a chief diversity officer? I'm not sure if you guys know about the news, and I haven't really read up on it, but there's a chief diversity officer, a Black woman appointed as chief diversity officer at SMU, I guess as of yesterday or something like that. I don't know. You guys know anything about that?
We didn't have one before? That's my question.
No.
I thought we did have. Oh, okay. Well.
Oh, it was announced this morning via email. Yeah, okay.
Louisa, I know that you've sat on CIQ stuff before. Do you want to maybe share with folks kind of the context of how that transitioned or transpired?
Well, the Black at SMU student movement in 2015, in their 10 demands, one of their demands was that SMU appoint a chief diversity officer. And 5 years later, that has happened. CIQ is short for Cultural Intelligence Initiative, which I think kind of was formed to fulfill some of the Black at SMU student movement's goals. To what extent they were successful in doing that is debatable. But the person that was appointed, Dr. Maria Dixon Hall, she was essentially the person who led the CIQ at SMU efforts. So yeah, I think that's how that happened.
Can I say one thing? I'm not sure if anyone knows the numbers, but I would be willing to bet the little savings that I have. I'm not really sure how many Black women work at SMU. I know Valerie Evans works in the journalism department. So I think that it's definitely, I like that I know Professor Dixon. She works in the advertising building, which is very closely tied with the journalism building, I think in Meadows. So I do like, for example, that she is a dark-skinned woman. She is heavier set. So there are, I think demographically, she's representing a lot of identities. So I appreciate that, but I think when you look at SMU and you look at the faculty in general, it's like, it's crickets, because I don't know, besides those two women, I'm not sure that I know of another Black female professor. So it's kind of, and I want to say that I had a Black male professor, but he taught African-American history. So I think that would be my critique. Like, I definitely think that we need to be in those spaces and pioneer them and move them forward. But I think SMU would have to look at its faculty, and like that would be a revolutionary step of like, well, you know what I mean? Is it enough to just hire her because she's one of, I don't know, probably less than 10, you know? So I don't know. I think that's my critique on it. But
the law school has a chief diversity chair as well for applicants applying to law school. And we've had her, or at least the chair has been established at least for 5 years. And the unfortunate reality is that the statistics reflect that the SMU Dedman School of Law is still predominantly white, despite having that chair initiated 5 years ago. I think right now we still have less than 30% minorities. I think it's 8% Black, and then maybe hold on, I wonder if I can find the statistics. All I know is that it's less than 30% still. And if that's like a reflection of what the law school can accomplish with a diversity chair, I'm not sure that that's enough. You know, I think we need more, and I don't know exactly what it is that we need more of, but it's definitely not just one chief diversity chair.
One other question from the audience: what do you think is the first step to take in the process of criminal justice reform? I guess that would be for, am I on mute? No, I'm not. I'm not on mute. That could be for Averie or Malanna, whoever wants to answer.
I think that, again, like even the way in which the question is being asked, it's centering reform, and you need to ask yourself, well, this is a rhetorical question because we all know the answer to it. You can't reform violence, right? Violence has to be dismantled and obliterated, and new systems have to be built. And so, and Angela Davis speaks to that. You have to imagine that in your lifetime, these things are possible. That's radical imagination, and we so badly need that in this country. But I think that, like, you also have to dismantle your idea of crime. People don't commit crimes because of choice. They commit crimes because of deprivation and because of survival, right? We all commit crimes. There's no such thing as an innocent person or a non-innocent person. We jaywalk, we steal from Target, we do these little petty things, but they're still crimes. That doesn't make me, you know, an innocent or a guilty person. There's no such thing. And you have to understand that it is not our job, it's not our earthly duty to eradicate evil. That's impossible. Like, wrongdoing and immorality is not something that a bunch of people getting together in a room can all of a sudden wave a magic wand and say, all of a sudden evil is gone. Like, evil will always be committed. Immorality will always exist. Humans are in a state of war. It's a very Hobbesian approach, but that's not our job. And we need to stop centering, like, I think when the conversations get to like serial killers and rapists, and it's like, well, the facts are that prison is the serial killer and it's the serial rapist, if you really want to go there. So we need to stop pointing the fingers, and we need to be really, really brutally honest with ourselves. These are humans that we've put into positions of power that are no different than me and everyone on this call. They just have a title and they have a badge and they have a gun. But like James Baldwin said, a cop is a cop. And I don't have enough time to figure out if you're good or not, because someone might die in this situation. And it's probably going to be me. Like, you don't have that kind of time when you're trying to survive, but we need to really analyze why people commit crimes. And we need to look at, like, you know, how society is shaped in this country very specifically. It's inextricably linked to capitalism. It's like people don't have access to things that they actually need to live. So we can't, like, we're jumping the gun when we're talking about trying to reform something that fundamentally, as Averie has said, is meant to do exactly what it does. It's built this way. It's not built wrong, it's built this way. So I think we need to start thinking about abolition, and it's really, really necessary. Like, prisons are, it's a false solution, and you can't have a singular solution for a system that commits multiple harms. People exist on multiple margins. It's a school issue, it's a mental health issue, it's a race issue, it's a gender issue. Like, it is so many, it's built, and that's why it's very hard. It's going to be very difficult because it's being literally bolstered by so many things that they just disenfranchise and fracture people. And prisons are not places where people can become who they really need to be in this life. Like, it's not a solution for anybody. I don't care who you are. Nobody needs to be in prison, period.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Another first step that you can take on a day-to-day basis is to talk about it, but talk about it in the right framework, which is, again, to abolish the prison system. And the unfortunate reality is that every movement, regardless of what it is, needs momentum, and us are the momentum. And we can create this momentum by speaking with one another, posting about it, talking about it within the right framework. And then the other thing that we could do for a first step towards, right, no one's going to wake up and then the prison system is going to be abolished the next day. We need politicians, we need representatives who have better freaking talking points. Like, who is writing their talking points? Okay, they need to be tapping into policy speech, into talking points that can convince the other side to come over and abolish the prison system, period. I mean, there are so many talking points that they can be including in their policy structures when they're running for office. For example, if a Democrat were running for a state attorney or state general attorney, they could be talking about how the prison system costs money, and that would buy into the other side, and they would be convinced, like, yes, wow, it does cost money, taxpayer money, we should abolish the prison system. So talking about it daily, that's what you can do. Politicians, you need to get better talking points.
I had a question, but it was a little long to type into the chat box. Do you mind if I verbally ask it to y'all? Okay, so I say it's because I know a little bit about y'all as students and now as alums, but for both Malanna and Averie, I realize that y'all have a pretty deep connection to the creative mediums, whether that's with film, photography, poetry. And in my understanding, you've also both been involved in some worlds, like with the fashion industry, media representation, etc. How do you feel like your relationship to these creative mediums or to fashion has in some way shaped the way you think about advocacy or navigate activism?
I can take this question, and unfortunately, this will probably have to be my last question. I have to hop off soon. But for me, backstory into the context of what happened to me this summer, I was posting law school related, human rights related videos on TikTok, and then I suddenly went viral one week, and I am nearing 100,000 followers on TikTok. And my experience as an advocate and an ally on social media has drastically changed with the amount of essentially influence and power that I have with this single account. It is scary, actually, of how many things and how many people I can impact and influence through the TikTok medium. But there's also a lot of cons to it, right? I have been learning through the process of garnering this audience on TikTok. I've had actually, I think, 2 former SMU undergrads. I don't think they were human rights majors. Maybe they were human rights minors, but they pulled me aside for a side conversation for certain content. And they were like, hey, I really want to have a conversation about particular things that you post. Like maybe, for example, reword something differently next time, or think about this particular community next time. And so it's been this incredible growth I've been seeing in myself, and also I've been seeing in others. Like Malanna said earlier, social media can be a dark, deep abyss of misinformation, of negative advocacy. You got Ben Shapiro up there, talking about crazy stuff. Things can be very polarized depending on the people you follow. We can get into these sort of visceral tunnels where we're only consuming specific type of information. I just think it's very important that people are not only educated and knowledgeable about the social media that they consume nowadays. I think that's extremely important, but also being confident enough to reach out to people if you feel that they're not disseminating correct information. I think the two people that pulled me aside to have those conversations and to teach me about their communities and to teach me about their cultures were confident and had this ability to have a conversation with me so that I could learn and grow with them alongside the community that I built on TikTok. And I'm so sorry, but I have to jet. Thank you guys so much for having me. And I will see you guys later. Yeah. If you guys want to reconnect, email me. I will be there to answer your questions. Bye, guys.
Thanks so much, Averie.
I kind of got lost in your question, Hope. So you're saying, how do you use creative outlets to channel human rights related work?
Right. And I think the way I'm asking or thinking about it too is that traditionally when I'm talking to a high school student who wants to go into human rights and they're on like the speech and debate team, they've done mock trial, there's a very specific sort of pre-law edge that a lot of people bring into this work. And I feel like something that's really refreshing within your work, your activism, I feel like you're incorporating a lot of creativity or sort of like maybe what we consider to be a non-traditional or more inclusive lens. I would just love to hear about like how that journey of creativity and that journey of activism have somehow aligned or coexisted for you.
Yeah, I think it's also similar to, I think Bryn asked this in the chat too, like how do you recommend using writing to advocate for human rights while at SMU? And I'm sure that a lot of the people here know that the poem that I had published just recently in a digital magazine, I wrote while I was at SMU, and I wrote it for Dr. Halperin's class, America's Dilemma, for my creative project. And I also got it published in one of SMU's magazines called Kairos, which is like a literary magazine. But I think that, like, again, I'm just gonna keep reiterating this idea of like using storytelling as a medium, and the fact that like all content and all stories are worthy of being shared. They don't have to look a certain way. They don't just be very raw. They can be very natural. Like sitting with your grandmother and talking about where she's from and where she was born, that's oral history. That's like putting, having a voice memo and recording her, like that. These are things that are creative, but they're non-traditional. But I think like, to your point, we have to unlearn that like major human rights advances are gonna come through the law. The law has given us really rarely anything. It doesn't protect us. Like I said before, like the 2.3 million people that are in prison right now doesn't make America safer. There's no proof of that. It doesn't make the world safer at all. It just actually makes the people that are vulnerable and marginalized they're harmed in more ways. So it actually adds to the collective trauma that we all experience here as global citizens. But there's no proof that removing people from the streets and putting them behind bars makes our world safer. That's not something that we can ever do. So I think that we have to unlearn that things have to be traditional. I do think that to unravel a system, you have to work within. And like, I'm not saying that everybody should be creative and then, it's anarchy. I'm like, you have to have people that are lawyers, that are presidents, that are like, these are things, we need people like in all parts of it, but we need people with specific agendas that are able to mobilize and like really be raw in their pursuits. Like, it's just not like, we've tried this, how many times, and look where we're at. I'm very disappointed, to say the least, in the ticket, but we got to do what we got to do. But it's like they go against everything that I stand for collectively, and so does Trump. So it's like, I think, I don't know, it's really tough. But I would say that like, keep producing content. Like, all content is worthy, and like just start flooding applications, especially in this new world order. Like content creation, like you need to digitalize, like start a portfolio, and just like make yourself, it's not even about selling your work. It's about being like, I value the relationships and the places that I'm in, and I want to show like people these things, it's like, and people love it. Like, there's so much to do. You could write a script. You could do so many things. You could paint, you could make pottery, and like, there's just so many things that you can do. And like, people want your work if it's globally informed. Like, that's where we're headed. People want stuff that matters. They want content that matters, even if they want to appear as if they're woke. Play into the trope. Get your money and put your work on there, and then you'll ascend. That's what I would say. even apply to places that you know are not down. If they want to use your work, then get paid and use you know what I'm saying? Like that's what I'm saying. But
we hear you.
yeah.
Awesome. Well, Malanna, thank you so much. Thank you so much for carving out time out of your evening to speak with us tonight. I'm so thankful to have been able to listen to you and Averie speak, and you guys do amazing work and have given us so much insight, inspiration, seriously, so much. So thank you so much.
Thank you guys so much for, like I said, allowing me to just speak. And even if I can be long-winded and my prose is free form and it's a lot, but thank you.
Yeah, we love it. We absolutely love it. So thank you guys. And thank you audience members for joining us and sticking through and listening and asking questions. It's just been a great hangout to end our hangouts for this summer. So yes, at all students, I guess I'll be seeing y'all in passing with our masks on in a couple of weeks. So, but yes, thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. Everyone, thank you so much.
Thanks, Malanna.
Thank you guys. Bye.
Bye, you all.
Thank you.